Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
I'm Stephen Carroll, and this is Here's Why, where we take one news story and explain it in just a few minutes with our experts here at Bloomberg.
These record numbers in terms of tourism also pose challenges, and we need to deal with those challenges also for our own population. What we see when looking at the outlook for tourism this year is that we might reach the 100 million. We are a 49 million inhabitants country.
The sound of some of the anti-tourism protests in European towns and cities in recent months, and reaction from Spain's economy minister Carlos Cuerpo. While large numbers of visitors to places like Barcelona, Paris or Venice are nothing new, the resurgence in travel after the COVID pandemic has come with more forceful opposition from residents. In 2024, European countries hosted over 750 million tourists, up almost 50 million on the previous year. In many places, that's meant a tipping point into over-tourism, where daily life becomes unbearable for locals. So here's why summer hotspots are turning against tourists. Feargus O'Sullivan from Bloomberg CityLab joins me now for more. Feargus, everyone loves to complain about tourists in their city, but how bad is the problem of over-tourism in Europe?
Well, it's certainly bad enough that now people in tourist destinations across Europe are taking to the streets to protest. It's bad enough that museum workers in Paris at the Louvre have gone on strike to protest conditions because they say the overcrowding is unmanageable. It's also got bad enough that tourist numbers have gone up compared to previous years. There was a 40% jump in arrivals in Europe between 2023 and 2024. So certainly people aren't just imagining this, and it's certainly true that it's become a kind of a pressure cooker. It should be said that this resentment over tourism may be driven as much by exhaustion as by increases, because while tourist numbers are projected to grow sharply ongoing, many places are actually only reaching the visitor levels they experienced before the pandemic now. So it's really as much that people can't take it anymore than suddenly they're being flooded.
That's an interesting point. Just give us an idea of what sort of places are we talking about where we've seen the most resistance to this?
The worst places for over-tourism, I'd say, fall into three categories. There are Mediterranean beach resorts with the side order of the Canary Islands, alpine ski villages, and high-profile historic cities, places like Barcelona, Paris. Now, in terms of the places that are suffering most, I suppose the place with the highest number of visitors to residents is the Greek island of Zakynthos in the Ionian Islands, and that last year got 150 visitors for every individual resident, which is a huge number. However, it could be skewed because, of course, holiday islands tend to have low year-round populations because people who were born there often go to the mainland to get work. You could argue that places like Paris maybe have it even worse because just the sheer concentrations they have there. So in 2024, Paris got 400,000 tourists per square kilometre, which is places it far, far ahead of other cities that have had similar problem concentrations, such as Athens and Copenhagen. So I suppose those are the places that are the worst.
So places that are seeing these issues, what are authorities doing about it?
Well, there are a lot of things that cities and local governments are doing that might help to bring the situation under control. There are various things. One big one is Airbnb bans. In Barcelona, there will be no single legal Airbnb from 2028. That's when the last legal license runs out. And there are also in many other cities, there have been caps on rentable nights, which means you can't rent out a flat on Airbnb or Wimdu or Vrbo for more than a fixed number of nights. That's supposed to stop those flats disappearing from the long-term rental market, which is is a big problem. So that's been happening. There have also been things like cruise ship bans. Cruise ships are particularly resented in many cities because not only do they disgorge a very large number of visitors all in one go, they do so for people that have already been fed and have somewhere to sleep for the night. So actually, in terms of congestion versus hassle, they are particularly strong offenders. So Amsterdam is moving its cruise terminal out of town. Venice has banned them from coming into the canals. So that's another one. Finally, you'd say there were fees and taxes. So Venice now actually charges on over 150 days a year for day trippers to come into the city as a way of maybe managing that flow. Amsterdam is one of the other places that charges a nightly tax on accommodation. That's 12.5% on top of your hotel bill. So that's another thing. Finally, there's a more of a promotional approach, which is just to spread visitors away from hotspots, to encourage them to go to less obvious places. Amsterdam, again, for example, if you go onto their main tourist website, iAmsterdam Now, then their top 10 sites they'll recommend would include places that you haven't necessarily heard of, breweries that don't brew Heineken, a castle in the suburbs, various places that they're trying to get people to go that aren't, the flower market or Anne Frank's house.
So providing inspiration, perhaps, rather than dissuasion from some of those authorities. I mean, the big question here is, of course, a lot of these places benefit massively economically from having a lot of tourists. So where does the balance lie between the money that you make from having people come and visit where you live and the sort of problems that we've talked about that sort of tourism can create?
Well, that's a very good question. I'm not sure anyone has yet been able to answer that fully. For a start, most of these measures that are supposed to control tourism, they may have some positive benefits, but they don't reduce visitor numbers and they aren't reducing the growth of tourism. So it's difficult to say if anyone's going too far or if anyone's not going far enough, because this whole area is kind of in its infancy. It is, of course, true. On the most basic level, most of us, if we can afford to, go on holiday. We love going on holiday. There is a potential for, mutually beneficial cultural exchange between people who host and people who visit. This is also vital income for many, many places, especially places in southern Europe, for example, where governments may be quite heavily indebted and they need the extra tax income. A lot of people rely on places such as the Greek islands, which are suffering under strain for their livelihood and to just pump stuff generally into the economy. So, of course, there is value for this. There is value to tourism and people appreciate the income. Finding that balance, I'm not sure we're there with a fixed formula yet.
So we've talked about the problem. We've talked about some of the solutions or the steps that authorities are taking. Do we have, or is there a place that has a good recipe for how to manage tourism?
I have to say that having researched this myself, I could not yet find anywhere that has truly managed to create the right balance. It's partly because the demand for tourism is so high and the income to be gained from tourism is so high that most of the measures designed to control it are really piecemeal. So, for example, capping nights on Airbnb, that's very, very hard to police. Again, in Barcelona, they're actually banning Airbnb. That only is really going to come into effect in 2028. There isn't yet evidence that it's necessarily easing the housing crisis in the city, which of course has many, many causes, and tourism might be just one of them, and actually just getting rid of tourism isn't necessarily going to sort that. So entry fees into places like Venice, tourist taxes, they are maybe helping in that they allow governments to get extra income to manage the effects of tourism, but they don't necessarily do anything to reduce the volume of people coming. There's an estimate from some research, actually, I think Amsterdam commissioned itself, that for their overnight hotel tax to genuinely be a deterrent, it would need to be 3 times higher. So there are problems with that. I know I'm sounding like I'm really bashing hard on these people at the moment, but spreading visitors away from hotspots, there is evidence that if you promote places that are less obvious destinations, numbers will rise in those destinations, which could be a good thing. What doesn't happen is that numbers then fall in the places that are oversubscribed. So spreading people simply allows space for more tourists to come and fill their place.
Aha, a tricky recipe indeed. Feargus O'Sullivan from Bloomberg CityLab, thank you very much. For more explanations like this from our team of 3,000 journalists and analysts around the world, go to bloomberg.com/explainers. I'm Stephen Carroll. This is Here's Why. I'll be back next week with more. Thanks for listening.